All right, so let's fix that real quick while we
So observant. Ooh,
shoop.
Mr.
All right,
Perceptive.
musical
I
chairs.
rolled a nat 20.
Ooh, good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adventure on So Many Levels. We're going to prepare to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Woo!
Yeah. It's important. Yeah.
Begin the beginning.
Yes. I am Christiana Ellis, and I'm gonna be the Dungeon Master. I guess technically I am already. I mean, I'm doing the Dungeon Master part, but we are going to be playing a Session 0 this time, which is a little bit... we'll talk about what that is. In the meantime, let's first talk about our players. We've got Chooch Schubert,
Hello, hello.
Starla Hutchton,
Hello.
Vivid Muse,
Hi.
Mark Kilfoyle,
I got nothing.
and he's already joined us on a couple of one-shots, but he will be in the new campaign, Paul Fisher.
Good evening.
Yay. Noob.
Fresh meat.
Fresh meat.
So, as mentioned, what we're doing tonight is not the beginning of the story of our campaign. It is what's known as a Session 0, and if you are unfamiliar with the concept of a Session 0, here's the basic idea. We're going to be planning and preparing for the campaign by talking a little bit about campaign expectations, talking a little bit about safety tools, doing a little bit of collaborative world building, and then also collectively putting finishing touches on any little bits and pieces of your characters that maybe aren't quite ready yet. But one of the first things that I want to start with is that we had, with the first campaign of So Many Levels, something really special. And although it was actually my first campaign, I've certainly become aware in the 4 years that we were running it, how unusual it is to have a campaign run as long as ours did, to be able to go from level 1 to level 20 and to achieve a satisfactory finish instead of just kind of petering out. And I think it was really special and meant a lot to me. I think, I'd like to think the players felt the same way. But the thing we want to do here in a Session 0 for the new campaign is try to sever a little bit of the expectations that this has to be that right away. Right? Because I can imagine thinking about building a character and starting to feel like, oh gosh, I have to make sure this is a character that I'm going to be happy with, just as happy with at level 20 as I am at level 1. Right? And that is a reasonable sort of feeling to have. But what I would like to encourage everybody to do right now is the characters of the first campaign at level 20 were what they were because they had grown into themselves over the course of 4 years. And so it's not an appropriate expectation to feel like you have just as good a handle on your new character as you did at the end of the other campaign, right? So it's totally cool to still feel like I'm not totally 100% sure who this person is yet. Right? Like, that's okay, right? And the other thing is that we don't know what this story is going to turn out to be yet, right? We don't know how long we're going to run with this particular story or particular party. We kind of hope that it'll be for a while at least, right? But at the same time, I think what we need to do is make sure that we let this campaign be its own thing. It doesn't have to be, we don't want to put on something that hasn't even started yet, that it must live up to that amazing, unique, special thing that we all shared. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, about setting expectations. I am confident that we're going to have a good time, partly because the whole concept is going to be that we're going to keep checking in with each other and making sure we're having a good time. And if something stops being a good time, we'll fix it, right? So, but at the same time, we want to let this campaign be what it's going to be instead of trying to make it Campaign 1 Junior. Right? So, with that established, does anyone have thoughts on that? I have an agenda, bulleted list and everything.
Glad somebody's
I'm
organized.
just here for the
Right
ride,
on.
man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay.
Sounds good.
So let's talk. I kind of touched on this just a little bit, but let's talk about safety tools. Now, this was something we didn't really do with any kind of formality in Campaign 1, but I believe that I kind of took the heart of it and tried to do it at least informally, checking in with everybody as we went to make sure that everyone was still feeling okay with how the story went. Periodically checking in to just say, hey, how are you feeling about this? Is there something you really want me to avoid or something you'd like me to steer us towards? And those sorts of things. Because the goal here is we're playing a game that's about telling a story together, and we want that story to be satisfying and enjoyable for everybody. So that's what safety tools are all about. They're not about restrictions or handcuffs or anything like that. It's about saying we are a group of people that are coming together to play Dungeons and Dragons, but we don't all necessarily have the exact same reactions to everything. And so we want to just try to get on the same page with some things and build in some communication tools that allow us to navigate any periods where we might bump into something that makes someone a little uncomfortable, right? So I don't, just on the basis of the technological way we're doing it, I don't have a really easy way for someone to like anonymously put up the X card on the channel. But I would hope that basic concept of the X card is something that everyone can be comfortable with. Just because I think that there are some ways where like messaging me during the game or something like that anonymously, the risk is that I might not see it. Right? I might be so wrapped up in something that I don't see that I've been sent a private message or something like that. And so what I would say is maybe try that first, but if it's not working, I hope that we can all be on the same page that the idea of an X card is that if we're ever having the story come up against something where any of you at any time is really starting to feel like, I don't like this. This is not fun for me. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I wish that this wasn't happening. Anything like that. That is not something we want to have happen. Now, we might have dramatic, scary, upsetting things happen in the story, but that should always stay fun for the player. Right? So what we're talking about is any time that the player is feeling like this is not what I want the story to be. I'm being made uncomfortable as a player. And so in any case where that's happening, the X card, which I think we can maybe, we can talk about if there's another way to do this, but I think we could also just say X, like raise your hand and just say X. And what that means is that we figure out something else. Whatever was just happening, not happening anymore. We do something else. And we don't have to talk about why, right? Because if someone was really feeling uncomfortable about something, it might be uncomfortable to interrogate why they're uncomfortable about it. And especially since we're on a stream and everything, we don't want anyone to feel put on the spot in that. So if anyone is ever feeling like, this is no fun for me. I need us to change what's happening. If you call the X card, we will take it in another direction immediately. And we might talk about it off stream later just to try to understand how to avoid it in the future, how to avoid needing to use the X card at all. But I think that that's something that is important for everyone to have. Now, we've Chooch, Viv, Mark, and Starla and I have just played a long campaign together, so I think we're more or less pretty well aligned on some of that stuff. Paul, I know you relatively well from conventions and so on. We've played a little bit, but I think at the same time it's important for us to make sure that that tool is available and that everyone knows it is 100% cool and totally fine if at some point you feel like anyone want to use the X card. Now, what we could also do short of using the X card is we could talk about things like lines and veils, which is to say it's short of the X card, which means stop what's happening and do something else right away. We don't have to talk about it. Lines and veils would be more like, I don't like what's happening, I want to change it, but it's okay to talk a little bit about what the problem is and how we might do it, how we might change. And so that would be like, an example of that would just be, can we decide that this serial killer doesn't ever go after kids? And just say, let's just say, we're hearing about a serial killer, but we want to just say, no kids are ever put in danger by this guy. Like, that would be an example of a line, and if you feel comfortable just saying, let's decide that, that's what we do. And then a veil would be something where we can say, we're okay with what's happening, but we maybe don't need to dwell on it or overly focus on the details. Like if, for example, there's a serial killer, right? We can say we found a victim without having to dwell on all of the gory details. That would be an example of a veil where we could just say, we leave to the imagination the details of what happened there. And that would be a veil. And so lines and veils can always be requested as well. So does anyone have any questions about any of that?
No,
No, I'm good.
I love it. I think it's a really great tool. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm good.
I just wanted to really explicitly focus on that at the beginning of this campaign because I know that there have been other streamed games where you had people who, even like would say that they strongly believe in the concept of safety tools, but then in execution failed to live up to those ideas. And that's, sometimes that can happen because someone really just isn't considerate. Sometimes it can happen by accident. And that's why I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. So if there is ever a case where I am oblivious to the fact that I am trampling all over something that is making someone really uncomfortable and I don't realize it, I want you to tell me. Don't let me get to the point where I am horrified to discover that the last 15 minutes made someone want to cry, right?
Yeah.
Let's not do that. If we get to the point where it's starting to say, oh, I'm not sure about this, let me know so we can address it there and not let it get to the point where someone's actually upset. So that's kind of the idea here. And it's not just about protection for me, right? It's about just making sure that we're all having a good time. All right. So on that basis then, let's talk a little bit about the setting of our new campaign. So I've already discussed some of this with each of you individually, but some of what we're going to talk about now is not just details of what the new setting is like, but beyond that, the idea of what are some of the things we would like to see in this campaign, themes that we might want to explore, themes that we might want to stay away from, or anything like that. And we can have this be as broad or as specific as we want right now. But this is less about world building right now and more about just kind of like the broader concepts of it. And we're going to get into some more detailed world building a little bit later. So the the basic premise here is that we have the same world that our previous campaign took place in, the world of Sekamian, and that this campaign takes place there, but a period of time into the future. Now, I say a period of time just because I know that each of you, as I've talked to you about this, I've kind of gone back and forth on exactly how much time it is, because I really honestly had not, been able to sort of nail it down in my head. But I'm going to hereby declare it to be 100 years because that is a meaningful time period from the first campaign, and it works fine. It's a magic world. We can say however much happens in the meantime, right? So it's all about, establishing what we need to establish, but we can say it's been 100 years since then. And that's not to say that there aren't a lot of things that are different. There are certainly settings where you could imagine things not really being all that different after 100 years. But in this case, I think the world is pretty different, and part of the ways that it's different is the fact that the heroes of legend in campaign 1 did some stuff that has had a meaningful influence on the way that the world has developed since. And
Tiny little.
yeah, so we're going to talk about some of that, but I think what we are going to do first is say that because it's been 100 years and the nature of the magic and the characters involved means it is quite likely that some of the characters, at least, are still around, right? I think that my preference, and we can talk a little bit about this if anyone has feelings about it, my preference would be to kind of lean away from having too many connections, or at least especially early on, right? I think that this is something you see like in a lot of different like fandoms, or like say Star Wars. There can be this tendency to make everything be a reference to or connected to something else, and I feel like that honestly shrinks the universe, right? You can't have someone just be a new person who is not actually the cousin of someone else that you knew already, or that sort of thing. And so my gut feeling is that I would like to kind of lean away from having too many direct connections and encounters to the original heroes of legend. That's not to say there can't be knowledge about them, but that we're not going to have the party meeting Nira at level 2, right? That's kind of my thinking. Now, that's not to say that they might not eventually have some kind of an encounter if the story seems to go like it's going that way, but at least at first, I think we're going to be steering away from that, if that makes sense. Does anyone have like thoughts or feelings about that?
No,
Oh yeah,
I
Nira would
think
scare
that's a great
scare the
idea.
crap out of people. So no.
So
I don't
like
think
that
I'm ready
very
to
much.
find out yet if Amethyst is alive or dead. So I'm happy to just wait.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't need
She's
to
the
know
spirit
right
of
now.
the tree, and we know
Yeah.
the tree is like the glue that holds the universe together. So I think
Yeah. As long as it's not
right.
slipping in the shower or something, you're probably
that's my
good.
head canon, and I'm sticking to it, and y'all can't talk me out of it. So
That's certainly my canon. Yes.
Sorry, I'm just looking over there because my dog's giving me a look. Anyway, but yeah, so that element that the original heroes of legend are somewhere out there in the world, probably, but we don't necessarily know exactly what's going on with them, and we're not going to have the campaign focus on let's go find the heroes of legend just so we can have references. But that said, we are taking place in the world that they changed. And so what does that mean? Well, I think that in many respects, some of the big changes that the heroes of legend wrought on the world of Sekamian are things like the value of diversity, because the heroes of legend were a diverse group of individuals who came together to save the universe and made a big point while doing so of how important it is to not become isolated and homogenous, because that messes things up almost every time, right? So I think And then paired with that is they made the ability to travel long distances with the ability to travel long distances and even to travel from one plane to another is much more readily available than it ever would have been before. And so for both of those reasons, I think that in general, almost anywhere in the world, or even some of the other planes that you might go, there's going to be all different kinds of people there. All different kinds of races and species and so on. And that's not to say you're not going to still have a dwarven city where it's mostly dwarves, but that dwarven city might have a flower shop run by a dragonborn and an elf who runs the daycare, and a halfling that does safari tours into the Underdark. Like, all of those sorts of things are ordinary and would not really be questioned.
Question: can we visit all of those things? Because that sounds amazing.
Well, we'll see, right?
Start the itinerary.
Yeah. So the idea then is that there might be some races that are more exotic, and I know that some of the characters that you've made are going to fall into that category. But even with those, I think that the world has changed in a way that the idea of encountering someone who looks very different and you may have never met a person like that before, that's not something that's responded to with fear, but more like curiosity. Like, oh, I've never met a person who looks like you before. I wonder where you're from. I'm interested, as opposed to, oh, you look strange, go away, that sort of thing. And in general, I think that as a general theme of the campaign, I kind of want to lean away from doing stories about any kind of like a racial bias between one fantasy race and another. That's not to say you might not still have some culture clashes, but in general, I don't want to do stories about, the elf town that doesn't like outsiders, and the human town that thinks tieflings are all evil, right? Like, I'm just less interested in those types of stories. Anyone thoughts on that? I mean, I phrased it in a way I don't want you to feel like you can't challenge it without being a fan of, because I think it can be interesting to tell stories that involve some of those themes, but that's
Yeah. And it's definitely, we know it's not a utopia, and there's definitely always friction or whatever. And,
Yes.
but it's just not, that's
Yeah.
not going to be the core thrust of it. And that totally makes sense.
yeah.
I'm
So
happy with it.
So, yeah, we're definitely not talking about a utopia where everyone gets along, because it's a question. There's going to still be different people who have different opinions about what's right and what should happen, and who gets logging rights in that forest, and, who really invented that particular spell and that sort of thing. All of those things happen. And for that matter, other things that happen is that because planar travel has been made so much easier, that means bad things too, right? Because that was kind of the other side of the coin of making the tree connect all of these different planes, is that you're going to have devils and demons and other creatures that really are evil, or at the very least want very different things than most people on the prime material plane would want. And they have more readily accessible means of traveling to the material plane and trying to do what they're going to do there. And so that can cause conflict in and of itself. And that's actually, and sometimes you just get monsters pop through, right? That's going to happen too.
Mm-hmm.
And so that all happens still too. The other thing is that because of the time passage, we have technology has increased. And when I say technology in this context, it's still largely magic-based rather than science-based in the sort of industrial revolution we had on our world, because there's still magic, and magic is, important there. But in general, low-level magic like cantrips and up to like first or second level types of spells, much more common and even ordinary for the average person. Not that everyone can cast them, but they wouldn't be shocked or surprised or or even like ignorant about it. Like the idea that, so as a couple of examples, and some of this is drawing from the Eberron setting, but the idea that you might have a cousin who went to a wizard's academy in the big city, and as part of their studies, they got to go on an expedition where they're going to spend a semester studying abroad in the elemental plane of Earth. And that's very exciting, but then you're getting married and you want to let them know. So what you would do is you would go down to the town square and you'd pay your gold and stand in line to use their sending stone that allows you to contact your cousin in the elemental plane of Earth and let them know what's going on. And all of that would be perhaps novel. It's like not something you do every day, but it's stuff that people do. It's things that happen. Anyone have thoughts or questions there?
I
mean-
like that a lot.
I do too.
I think Industrial Revolution and electricity is a pretty great analog to magic.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to wrap your head around, I think.
And you can get paid for services like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you can use it as the power source to make more technology-based things. Like you can have a cart that rolls and you can have an unseen hand that pushes it along.
Yeah.
Instead of, a two-stroke engine.
Right, exactly. I think a pretty good, another sort of pop culture touchstone that might help people understand a little bit what I'm shooting for here is the difference between Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. Those are two animated series where one of them takes place in a more primitive setting in the sense of just time passage, not in terms of people's culture or anything, but then in the Legend of Korra, we're decades down the line and there's been kind of an industrial revolution. There is things like electricity and cars and that sort of thing, and so we're not quite exactly that, but there are things, for example, like trains and airships and constructs. And, you might, for example, have, the restaurant that you go to for lunch every day has a chef who uses prestidigitation to make his food even better and knows how to cast unseen servant to carry the plates around to everyone. And then you go outside and you meet your farmer friend who's come into town to buy a new magical construct that he uses to plow his fields. And so things like that. And,
Yeah.
I'm thinking you could have giant magical construct fighting champions.
yeah, so that's actually something we'll maybe talk a little bit more about. But one of the things that I also want to illustrate here, this is something that was true of the world of Sekamien before and is still true. It is a world where there are spirits. And mortal creatures versus spirits, there's kind of a duality there where mortal creatures have limited influence over their own physical form, but they can kind of just decide to change things about themselves or do things differently. They can have different ideas, change their mind about something, and their feelings about things might evolve more over time. Whereas spirits are generated and grown from energy created by mortal creatures. They tend to be associated with things that mortal creatures will think of all as one thing. And they have a lot of control over their physical manifestation, but their nature is dictated by the spiritual energy that creates them. And so what that means is, for example, is that If it gets a big rainstorm and there's just kind of a low area in the field that tends to flood, but then it goes away when everything dries out, probably not going to have a spirit of the puddle. But you have a pond that gets dug out, and then people start saying, oh yeah, well, if you want to get to Steve's house, you go down this way and then turn right when you get to the pond, and people start knowing the pond and thinking of the pond as a thing. That's where you might start getting a spirit of that pond grow. And the nature of that spirit is going to be based on the energy that people have for that pond, right? Like if it's a nice, pleasant, pretty little pond that people like to sit by and have a picnic or something like that, it might be a more friendly type of spirit. But if it's the sort of place like, oh gosh, I hate when it, every time it rains, it overflows its boundary and makes the road all muddy. I hate that little pond. It might be kind of an ornery spirit by contrast, right? Mm-hmm. Now, that spirits can be very small and inconsequential, or they can be tremendously powerful. And an example of a tremendously powerful one would be the spirit of Mount Rishama, who of course played a prominent role in our first campaign. Mount Rishama is a mountain that is so big that it literally dwarfs every other mountain in that range. It is notably huge, and part of that is because it has been thought of as like the king of mountains for a long time, and it's become something that is worshipped as a powerful spirit, which tends to shape its nature, and eventually the mountain itself can even become bigger because people think more about it and that sort of thing. But in the years since the events of Campaign 1, Rushama has grown from being just a powerful spirit in the prime material plane to becoming something more like what we might in other settings think of as a god. Because if you think about it, spoilers for the end of Campaign 1, but every person existing in the multiverse all at one moment got a whole story about how Rushama was formative in the creation of the universe and critical in saving the universe. He's a big deal now. And that means there are, so before, people would certainly know of Mount Rushama if they live anywhere where it's visible. The people who lived on the mountain thought he was very important. But you wouldn't necessarily have anything to do with Rushama if you didn't live close enough to see the physical mountain. That's no longer true. There are churches and temples to Rushama all over the universe, like different planes and everything. But Rushama is also not the only entity for which that is true. The former Fae Queen, Solomonia, has now ascended to the throne of Mount Celestia, the pinnacle of the lawful good plane, and is now essentially the goddess of truth and light. And basically, there is a strong religious organization focused on her. And some of the things some of the effects that has had on everything else are some shifts in cultural expectations of what is good versus evil. And this is not true of every single individual anywhere. It's just general approaches and certainly things that anyone in that church would believe. And those include things like keeping secrets is bad. Generally speaking, if you're keeping something a secret, it must be because you're ashamed of it. And if so you shouldn't keep secrets because, secrets are bad. You shouldn't do that, right? Other things like the idea that a big, lavish celebration of joyful events in life are entirely appropriate. So, for example, a big, expensive wedding to celebrate that your son is getting married or something like that. There's no question of wouldn't that money be better spent feeding the poor or something like that? It's like, no. a big elaborate celebration to celebrate good, joyful things is part of how you give thanks to the universe for the good fortune you've received. Things like that. So some of those things obviously are going to continue to come into play. Rushama and Solomonia are not the only entities. In particular, several other notable creatures who had prominent roles in that big mention now have interplanar reputations. And that can mean a lot of things, right? So all of those things are kind of part of the mix too, is that there are spirits, all sorts of little tiny spirits here and there that you might encounter. There's medium-sized spirits that you might actually interact with or have conversations with or need to deal with. And in particular, one of the things that I think we're going to talk about a little bit later is in the city where we're going to start our campaign. It's a big city, and it's going to have different districts. They're a little bit like we think of like the boroughs of New York or suburbs of any city, right? But the thing is, it's going to be to the point where each district has enough of its own kind of coherent identity, that like what it means to be in that district, that each district kind of has its own spirit. And that spirit reflects what it is that people think about that district, right? And those sorts of things. So all of that is kind of a smorgasbord that allows lots of different possible things, but that's part of what I'm thinking in terms of the nature of the world. Right. And a lot of nodding along, I know, just because, just for everyone watching, I've said almost all of this to everyone already separately.
Those of you at home, we nodded our interest.
Yes.
Nods and grins and smiles across.
Right.
For those of you on the audio, it was spectacular.
You should have watched, really.
There
So-
were raised eyebrows all over the place.
Oh,
Floating
yeah.
eyebrows.
So, before we move on, I wanted to, I guess, touch base with everyone, and this is something we can come back to if you think of something later too. But are there elements of the setting that you want to kind of ask more about now, or things that you would like to see explored at some point in the campaign, or any other questions kind of like that? Anything else that you want to know now because it might help you with what your character is doing, or anything like that? And if you think of stuff later, that's fine too.
So Solomania is like one of the highest levels of deities in
Yeah.
the world, and she's considered to be lawful good.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Now, there's going to be certainly people who maybe don't necessarily follow everything she says, right? But that would just tend to mean that, like, if someone is lawful good, they are likely to follow what she says. But there's other ways to be good. And some of those ways might be people who think that the way Solomonia does it is not right. Right? So it doesn't mean that she is only good and nobody disagrees. It just means that lawful good is going to trend in that direction.
So is she on par with Rushama, or is there one that's considered more deity than the other, or whatever?
I think that would be subjective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
So I think that I'm not super interested in giving them a power ranking right now. They do different things. They're not really getting in
Sure.
each other's way.
I guess what I was really asking is, as far as common in the land, like they would both be known across
Yeah,
the plains?
I think pretty much anyone you meet in the sort of known world will know at least about both of them.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, so as we continue on, as I mentioned, you can always come back to any of those sorts of questions if you think of some later. But so let's now go to character talk. And so part of what this is going to mean for our session 0 here is that each of you has already largely put together a character, and we've talked about them individually. And so I know that some of you have things about your character that you probably don't want to share with the group yet. That's fine. You don't have to say anything tonight that you're not ready to talk about. But I think what we will do is maybe just briefly talk a little bit about whatever parts of the character you feel like you want to talk about, so that we can start as a group helping to fill out any details that are not quite there yet, right? So if, for example, you're feeling like, well, I feel like I want my character to have worked at a school, but I haven't really thought about what the school is like, or who else is there, or who I would know there, or what brought me to the city. I haven't really nailed those things down yet. So some of those sorts of things are the things that we could talk about as a group, because sometimes bouncing these things off of the other players gives you ideas that you wouldn't have come up with on your own. All right. So, like I said, you don't have to share anything about your character that you don't want to yet. You can keep your secrets if you like. But with that, who wants to start and just talk about whatever you are ready to talk about with your character?
I can go.
All right.
Mine feel pretty complete.
Okay.
Actually, I think I'm on that side of things.
Sure.
I was just going to send you an image file. But, picture's worth 1,000 words.
Sure.
But before I find that, so I am playing a Warforged, who's going to be more or less an open book. Their name is Sequential, and they are an artificer, which is similar to like a wizard, but more of technologist, I would say. And so he's an experimenter, a tinkerer, and was actually, as a Warforged, which for people who do not know is a robot, basically, a sentient, walking, talking, metal, mostly metal robot person. And Sequential was built as basically a lab assistant who their builder would develop new types of potions and new types of trying different combinations of elements and chemicals and find out what the different properties are. So being more of a robot computerish type device or creation, Sequential has been working through basically every combination of element and chemical that they know of and scratching them off. What did that do? What did that do? What did that do? And to come up with, essentially a catalog of everything in the known multiverse. And their creator would regularly leave and go find new things to try out. Sometimes, he could be gone for months. And Sequential would just crunch on what he has now, or I keep saying he. I'm going to slip into he. My intention is they, because they don't really have need for a gender. Mm-hmm. But, I'm clumsy.
Well, so I think if it's your intent that they have them pronouns, we'll all try to do that. It can be tricky, so I think maybe we forgive each other if we slip, but yeah, I think it's important to respect that if that's the way you conceive the character.
And yeah, indeed. And so Sequential might, disable their kind of chronometer and not really pay attention to things when it's not necessary, and was doing so and kind of realized one day, hey, Crater's been gone a really long time, so maybe I'll start keeping track again. And started keeping track, and then it became longer and longer and longer, and realized he might not be coming back. And so basically set out to find him. And being very naive, certainly had some adventures in with society, perhaps was taken advantage of a time or two. And but is, finding their way in the world and learning how to deal with people, deal with being a part of society.
All right. So, for anyone not familiar with the Warforged Race, it's essentially a robot is not a far off description, right? It's a sentient construct, living, but artificial in construction and don't need to breathe or eat and that sort of thing, right? One of the things that you and I discussed briefly was the question of, are you the only one, or that you know of, or are there lots of Warforged around? And
yeah, my thought is that Sequential is unique as far as they know, but there's no reason to think there might not be others.
right. So as we talked about the idea that in this setting there might be magical constructs that people have do all sorts of things, I think in general, I like to think that maybe it's mostly considered a safety thing that you don't have those magical constructs be too automated, right? Like they're generally intended to be, there's always like an operator, like there's a person controlling them, so that you don't have things like the steam golem from campaign 1, which, rampaged out of control because of faulty instructions, right? And so the idea that there would be a sentient, completely autonomous creation like Sequential would be more unusual. And to be sure, nothing quite like a Warforged is commonplace. But people might be used to seeing constructs that are shaped like a person, might
Right.
assume that that's what you are until shown otherwise. All right, cool. So,
Yeah.
was there anything that you wanted to, like, one of the things that I was going to work with you a little bit on was if you wanted to, you had mentioned that you had encountered some people who maybe took advantage of you, and we could talk a little bit about who some of those people might be. If they're like, are you thinking they were here in the city where we're going to be setting, or were they further away?
Yeah, I hadn't necessarily thought about how far they've traveled so far. I definitely wanted them to have some experience in the world, not being a total babe in the woods. But I hadn't really thought about how much time.
Okay.
I came up with so on the D&D character sheet, you have allies, enemies, backstory. So I came up with some enemies, but I haven't figured out whether they would be local or not. There was definitely a run-in with One-Eyed Maya. He'll never forget the Fritter brothers, and of course Benevolent Maldo. Learned a lesson or two.
Great.
But
So I think
maybe one group would be still in the city and others were far in the past
sure.
on the road.
So this is how I'm thinking we'll kind of approach this. So we'll have each person kind of do their preliminary introduction, and then raise a little bit of a question of something that's maybe not resolved yet, but we could think about it, and then move on to the next until we've done everybody, and then we can kind of come back to those questions. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Great. So who would like to go next?
I can go next.
Great. Be my guest.
I wandered off that particular tab.
Sure.
So my character is Zinhorn Windborn. He is a dragonborn cleric of Rushama. And although he is only 22, he is actually one of the recipients of the original message. His parents were great adventurers. They were known far and wide. They investigated all sorts of interesting things going on in the world. And about a year or so after the message of Rushama went out, they had tracked down a portal through space and time to a pocket dimension where there was a fantastic party that never ends. And they brought him with them, and everyone was dancing and having a wonderful time. And at some point, after what seemed like many, many days, he went looking for a privy and somehow found the exit. And that's how he wound up here. And it also seems to be roughly 89 years in the future, or at the time it was 89 years in the future that he came out. And at the time he arrived in this time period in the city, he was 10, and he was found by the Church of Rushama and the local orphanage. And he was treated very well, and they were still organizing and internalizing the messages of loving and helping and hope.
Zinhorn was, right?
Zinhorn.
Yeah, as opposed to the church, right?
The orphanage was as well. Orphans may not have been treated as well in the past, but they were trying to treat them better as part of what came as part of the legacy of Campaign 1. And so having been fed and clothed and loved and taken care of, he has grown up to embrace those things, and he is now a cleric working at the orphanage, and he does a lot of work with local guilds and craftspeople and the militia and the army and the whatever the police are, making sure that orphans have access to get into different trades and different careers so that they can become productive members of society, and they aren't abused and taken advantage of.
So just the timeline, they were a kid when they heard the message back in the past, right? And so they were still a kid when they went through this party portal, and but then they were there for 89 years, and now they've been here for
roughly 12 years.
Right.
They've been here.
So you know your way around.
Yes, I've lived in the city. I've worked and trained with different aspects of the church, and gone and talked to the different guilds and temples and town guards and the army, and so he knows a lot of people, and he's always looking for an opportunity to help anyone. He's also freaked out by mimes.
Okay.
There are parts of the city that he steadfastly avoids when the street performers are out because something about mimes just they're one of the only types of people that he actually wants to hurt, and so he tries to avoid them.
All right. So, one of the questions that I'd like to leave us with for now on Zinhorn are just things like what the orphanage itself is like what kind of neighborhood it's in, and then maybe a couple of NPCs, like one other adult that works there, and maybe one or two of the kids that you're especially close to. And you can think on that while we go around with everyone else. So I think that's what we'll come back to, but I wanted to give you the sneak preview so you're not on the spot with it. Okay, so who would like to go next? I can call on people if no one volunteers.
I can go. I don't
All
have
right, sure.
Mine is having a little bit of an identity crisis. Just because the character inspiration that I was using, I'm just not going to. I'm going to do something different, like you and I, Christiana, talked about. But so she is a Loxodon. She's a barbarian.
Just a quick note. Loxodon, I think probably a lot of people wouldn't know, but they're essentially like elephant people.
Yeah.
With the trunk and big ears and everything.
They from the neck up, they're elephant, and then their feet are kind of supposed to be elephant-like-ish, but it's not anything like, oh my God, that's an elephant-legged monster. It's just really the feet. She's got thick skin, but otherwise she pretty much resembles, from the neck down, she resembles humans. The race is, it was the Ravenica, I think, was the expansion.
Ravnica, yeah.
Ravnica. I always mispronounce it. Added into it, and I'm unfamiliar with it. But what Christiana and I talked about was that, maybe you can explain it better, because I know we talked about it.
Sure. So what we talked about is just a question similar to with Warforged, is like, we want to say, since we didn't have Warforged in Campaign 1, we want to just say, like, if we didn't have Loxodon that we encountered in Campaign 1, that's fine, but where are they? Like, where were they? Where did they come from if they're here now? We wanted to establish, like, are there lots of them around, or are, rare? And so I think what we settled on was the idea that there was another pocket dimension where there was a thriving society and culture of Loxodon where they were the primary sentient race there. But that it has been discovered since that there is a method of traveling out to the main material plane that can be done at certain times of year. And so they are, as a culture, interested in learning more about the wider outside world. And so they sent out people to do that exploring, but with a unique quality that they have is that they can have kind of a psychic connection to the people they sent out. So it's mostly one way. So, like, people are sort of vicariously watching your explorations, but they don't really communicate to you or control you. It's mostly just like you're sort of like a camera reporting back whatever you choose to do. But occasionally the psychic connection might eventually grow stronger and so on. So
hopefully.
Yeah.
If I study hard enough, hopefully.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we settled on there.
So I imagine her as being younger, more adventurous, and wanting to do this. And I even have, like, Christiana asked me to think of a couple of people, and I have, although I haven't named them yet. Names are hard for me.
That's fine. Well, so that is a perfect example of something that I think is good for us to think about as a group, because I know you had an original name. We don't have to necessarily talk about that if you don't want to, but figuring out what you want, like, some of those sorts of things, struggles, like if you're having a hard time thinking of a name, that's a perfect example of something that can be helpful to discuss as a group.
I think that I'm okay with that. I'm more because that's something that's really personal for me. So I feel like I kind of need to find that on my own. But
Well,
I
sure.
thought I had it at 4 a.m., but no, that's not it.
Okay.
So the thing I'm most I'm struggling to figure out. I've been bouncing back around in background, which seems really simple, but it because it adds attributes that'll be useful to the group later. I'm having trouble figuring out where she fits because I see her as being young. I see her as like the little story that I've made up for myself, Christiana, is that a tiefling wizard found their way through that portal that we talked about that opens cyclically. And she was astounded and just curious as heck and explored everything and smart as a whip. So she learned the language and she started teaching it to us. And she sort of set the model for how to introduce oneself to a new world and how to behave. So instead of like running up and grabbing things and stuff like that, it fits very much in with the Loxodon way, which is kind of very Zen, like, the patience of an elephant kind of really fits in here with this race. And so she is trying to do that. And so trying to find a background that fits with these other elements. She's young. She's kind of an ingenue type thing. Everything is new to her for the first time. She has not been in this world, in the material plane or whatever she would call this other area, this other dimension. She hasn't been there for long. She, is kind of just like starting the whole thing. And so I guess I just don't know what background makes sense for her yet. So
Okay.
that's kind of where I've been struggling.
All right. Well, so those are perfect examples of things that we can kind of come back around to talk a little bit more about.
Yeah.
One thing I want to touch on that I actually kind of meant to talk about earlier, talking about the setting, but has kind of come up twice now, is the idea of pocket dimensions. And I
Okay.
think that's something that has become clear, more and more clear as time has gone by, that there are a lot more small demiplanes and pocket dimensions than were sort of previously realized. So the big world tree, Emerald arboris, sends its branches and roots through all of the major planes, but somewhat like if you imagine taking a bed sheet and wadding it up into a little ball, there's all sorts of little wrinkles and folds in there that don't necessarily get captured on the big the big ticket branches, so to speak. And so discovering that there are all of these different little smaller demiplanes and pocket dimensions is something that, like, current magical research is finding more and more of those. And so there are some that are more known about already, some that are still being discovered, and that sort of thing. And so the pocket party portal that Zinhorn traveled through is another example where these pocket dimensions can vary quite a bit. They could be stable enough to have an entire society live in them, like the one that Viv's Loxodon character would come from, or it could be a perpetual party where time passes differently, like the one Zinhorn went through. Could be any number of different things. And so that's part of the setting as well. And something we'll be likely exploring in the campaign itself.
I like the phrase perpetual party portal.
Same.
Well, you could put pocket in there too. Perpetual. Where does it go in the sequence though, right?
Party,
Perpetual
pocket, portal.
party. So pocket perpetual party portal, or perpetual party pocket portal, or portal pocket. Yeah. We'll figure it out. We'll workshop it.
Yeah.
Like the portal.
Yeah. So that would be Viv's character, and we'll come back around to talk a little bit more about names and maybe some of the other NPCs that might feature in her background. All right, we've got 2 left.
Is it a waiting game?
Rock,
I have
paper,
other
scissors,
people in the
lizard,
other room,
spot.
so I don't know if they're making noise or not. So
Oh,
But I can talk a little bit about what I have in mind.
Sure.
There will be things that will come out during play. Folks know me, so I have plans. But the basic idea is it is a student of magic who's very curious. My intention is that I will probably engage every other character, PC or NPC, with a lot of questions. So kind of expect that, and I will not be offended if you kind of put your hand up and say no, stop. But that's going to be a character trait I'm going to try to promote, and so I want to give you that realization that I will just keep going if I can, just to kind of play the scene out. But I will stop kind of as directed and make it a background element. It's interesting so far that there's been kind of characters that are younger, because I'm definitely pitching younger as well. Young, curious wizard that, although at level 1 you don't really choose what direction you're going to go in, I have a direction for him in mind, where he'll hit at level 3. And I'm not really sure what to say aside from he is an apprentice to a particular wizard. One open question at the moment is whether there is a wizard in college or schools of magic, or if it's individual wizards that kind of teach. He's specifically kind of being taught by this wizard, sent to Pashan by his family, ostensibly to teach him things of the ways of the world, probably to get him out of the house, because he did not follow in the ways of his family. So, I don't know what to say specifically, because I like revealing things as we go.
Sure. Race?
But a gnome,
Yeah.
a young gnome. So he'll be, I suspect, the smallest of the group. And if I don't know how big Luxodons are or how big the Warforged are, but I wouldn't be surprised if my character ends up climbing up on someone's shoulder at some points just to see things.
So mechanically,
Certainly.
Loxodon are still medium creatures, but like Goliaths, they're tall, right? For that, tall and large structured, but like still technically medium in size category, mechanically. But
Yep.
7 foot, 7.5 foot.
Yeah, I'm thinking probably around 3 foot, so maybe shorter. I'm not sure exactly
Yeah.
where the line is.
Sure. Did you give a
Sequential's
name?
medium, probably like 6'2".
Yeah.
Did you have a name?
Oh yeah, Nedry.
Nedry.
And I will have a voice, but I won't use it until we actually start.
That's fine. So I think that some of the things that you mentioned as questions are kind of right there, just in the sense of like, we are going to be starting at least in the city of Pashan, partly just because, for my own amusement, it is the biggest location in the campaign 1 setting that the party just never actually went to. So I thought it would be fun to go ahead and start there. But one of the things that we're going to talk about in a moment are lots of things about like, what is Pashan like now? And so some of those sorts of questions I think are going to be what we will discuss as a group. And so some of those questions like, what is there a single university that's for wizards, or is it more informal, or how does that all work? Those are some of the things that we can talk more about. But in the meantime, last but not least, Starla, what would you like to say about your character?
Well, I did drop an image in the chat if you
Okay, so
wanted.
yeah,
Chess is in there too.
yeah. Where did you put them? Oh, they're in the Zoom
It's in
chat.
the
Okay.
Zoom
In the
chat.
Zoom chat, yeah.
Okay. Let me see if I can easily where I can.
I didn't know if you could or not.
Yeah, I can. It'll just take me a moment because I didn't prepare for it, but that's fine. So
Thought that was easier than passing screen sharing around.
yeah,
Or less complicated.
It is. So
But,
just
yeah.
let me give me a moment here then. Look, we got one for Nedry as well. So let's see if I can.
I've been rather distracted for the last hour or so since something nudged the idea of creating it on Hero Forge. Like,
Yeah,
okay.
so I will just, I think that this is something we talked about a little bit offline, but for anyone who's not already familiar with it, Hero Forge is a website where you can create a 3D model of a character and then potentially have it printed out as a 3D printed real miniature. But just the number of options and choices you have, including color, are just really good for getting a mental visual picture of the character that you are creating. So I highly recommend people check that out. Let's see if I can get some of these on here. So first so here's sequential. I'll just briefly kind of show it big real quick. So see, that's just a good example of what sequential might look like. Kind of put that down there in the corner. And
I
then,
put a picture of mine in there too. That's not her name. That's
Okay.
not her name.
all right.
That ain't right. Don't fit. It was
All
this
right.
close, but it's not right.
All right. So here's Nedry.
That's so cute.
I love it.
Nice.
Very cool. Yeah.
So cute.
All right.
Definitely can ride on my Loxodon for sure. I mean, we'll have to get to know each other first.
Yeah.
But,
All right. Let me just doing these in the order that we've already kind of talked about them. Okay. So this one's no background, but that's fine. So you can see we've got
Mine doesn't have one either, so
that's fine.
fair warning.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
That's awesome.
Cool.
I don't know
I
her
love
well
the
enough to
purple.
know where she was standing yet.
Yeah. All right, and then last but not least, Paul, pressure's on now, right?
Yes, I'm now looking because I was writing earlier,
Yeah. Here we go.
answering questions. So now I'm looking at like Half Dragon.
All right. So who is this person, Starla?
This is Carolina Swift, and she is a human. So
Oh.
not quite as exotic as the rest of y'all.
I guess that's okay.
And she is a bard who sings in a tavern in Pishan called the, hold on, let me check my notes, the Cunning Oaf Inn. And essentially her job is to function as a distraction when there are disturbances in the bar. So that is kind of her cue to start the show. She grew up kind of out in the country, sort of away from everybody, really. And she was mostly raised by a elven bard who actually, rather than being from, Mount Rushama or something like that, she actually has lived in Emerald Arboris for a very long time, and was part of the, like, she is much older, so she was one of the ones, she was frozen in amber, but being a bard, and from that time she has learned all of the songs and legends and all of, I mean, you know how Ket likes to talk, so she didn't necessarily know him, but he talks a lot and other people talk and share the stories. So that is a lot of what she learned growing up and being raised by this woman, kind of out in the sticks. But yeah. So that's kind of, I'm not sure what else to say there.
Sure. So I think some of the things that we might explore a little bit would be like just a little bit more about what's this tavern like? What kind of neighborhood is it in? Who are the people you work for? Any other people that you know in town? Because you kind of mentioned this mentor, but but she is not in town.
No, she is not in town. I left to go to the big city to learn, more songs and meet new people. Oh, she loves people, all kinds of people. She loves just the differences and how they look, and just finds them fascinating in general. She's a bit naive, very happy in general. Yeah, so the elf actually already has a name. The bard who trained her name was Siona. And the person that she works for, who owns the cunning oaf, if I can find it in my notes.
Emeril Leonard is what I had from you.
I don't know. Why do I not have it listed? Oh, wait. I know where it is. Yes. Emerald Leonard. And I think I pictured him as a half elf, but it was like, meh.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So, to recap, we have Chooch's character, Sequential, the Warforged Artificer. We have Zinhorn Windhorn, the Dragonborn Cleric. Windborn, I'm sorry. Zinhorn Windborn, yes. Cleric of Rushama. Then we have Name to be Determined, Loxodon Barbarian. We have Nedry, the Gnome Wizard, and Carolina Swift, Human Bard. So, now I think this part is going to be a little bit less me guiding everybody through, and let's make it a little bit more open discussion. Let's talk about... So, one last thought on character building. This is something that I shared with each of you individually, which is that I think it is 100% okay to leave big blanks in your character's backstory, to allow space for things to develop later, or new ideas that might come in later, rather than feeling like you have to set everything into concrete right off the bat. And so don't feel like you need to decide everything right away. Most of the time, if I've asked you a question or something, it's mostly meant to just kind of provoke some thought about like what your character's current circumstances might be as we begin, right? But that said, some of these things might still be to be determined, but and some of these things might be stuff that you want to leave as a mystery for now. All of that's totally fine. So what this is about right now is not making sure that we have, painted every single little corner and not missed any spots. It's more about, what do you feel like you would like to establish more firmly before we begin?
I had one quick question about the location. Is Pashan, I was trying to remember the map, is it landlocked, or
yes.
Is it, would there, yeah, it is? Okay.
Yes.
Just wanted to make sure. I was pretty sure that was true.
Right.
But, yeah.
So that's the other thing that I kind of meant to include here, is that I think what I would also like us to do is to start talking about what is Pashan like now. I have some ideas, but I consider it very open-ended. So for any of you, if you have ideas about, I would like there to be a neighborhood where it's like this, or I would like it to generally be like that, and that sort of thing. And that includes things all the way up to, I want there to be a particular park that I go in and hang out sometimes, or all the way up to things like, let's decide who's in charge in Pashan. Is it still an emperor? Is it still the Tashmian Empire? Or is it more like everyone's kind of just city-states now, it's a little bit more chill? Are they a democracy now? Or what's going on? Like, there was a question earlier, it's like if there's police or militia or whatever, like, let's find out. Let's talk. Let's decide what it is. Because a lot of these things, like, I could just decide, but I also think it's fun to build that together. So let's make Pashan something we create together, is the idea.
We never went there in campaign 1. But I believe there was some talk that there was actually a fissure there, but we didn't find out where because we didn't actually go there. And there was some hint that maybe the emperor wasn't quite himself, something to that effect.
Yeah, so tiny peek behind the curtains as far as my own thinking during the time of campaign 1 was that the emperor absolutely was charmed by Queen Salomonia and had mobilized his empire's infrastructure to do her bidding. And so that was part of the reason for imprisoning Andri and some of the other things that went on that just didn't matter very much because y'all never went there. So that's fine. But so that is part of what I think was true about it 100 years ago. Right? But that does not mean that any of that is still true today. Right? Now, I think it's probably just based on some of the other things that we've talked about. It's probably a bigger city. It's probably more cosmopolitan and sophisticated than it was 100 years ago. Technology is different. Now, if we wanted to take more inspiration from the Eberron setting, which I'm taking some from already, they have this elaborate, they call it, there's a city called Sharn, the City of Towers in that setting, where it's just, there's entire neighborhoods that are on middle floors of these enormous towers that are all linked with massive bridges at all different elevations and that sort of thing. So we could have it be something like that, or it could be a little bit more of a mundane kind of big sprawl, or we could be anything we want it to be. So what do you guys think?
I would think is like a capital that they definitely would have been early adopters of pretty much everything. So would be modernized, with all sorts of gadgets.
Like
I
the
kind of
idea
like
of
that
there-
idea.
Yeah.
And I like the idea of there being some sort of wizard college there. Like, I want to go there.
Yeah.
I want to see what that looks like.
So
This
so
is
yeah.
as big of a capital as I think it is, then like there would probably be like a variety of educational places for different
Yeah, universities
classes.
and
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm also kind of, and I don't know if this will work, but I'm kind of picturing also like you think of like New York City or San Francisco with different neighborhoods
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
that are like really those tight communities of different races and experiences and stuff like that. So like I just love the idea of it being starting in this big place where we can find pretty much anything.
Well,
I think the thing my character would most hope to find would be something like a meditation area. Like there will be more people like of that mindset. I'm assuming like kind of like what we talked about Amethyst Preserve being. So I'm assuming there'll be some sort of like park here or something like that she would gravitate towards to find kind of get her footing on what's going on in the world.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the only thing I can think of to ask for.
well,
I like.
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead and comment on that because I'm going in a different direction.
Sure. I was just going to say, like, the idea of having different districts that all have kind of their own identity was definitely along the same lines that I was thinking. And the idea that each district kind of has its own sort of major spirit that's kind of like a local demigod that kind of evokes the character of that district. And
Ooh,
there would
yeah.
be, I thought that it could actually be fun. There's the idea of something that could be like organized competition or like sports. That could even be like the competition between different districts and that sort of thing.
Oh, that's cute. Yeah.
And there's a lot of like your district spirit, right? In
Yeah.
both senses,
That's so cute.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we can think more about that. Mark, you were going to say?
So An idea struck me, which I think would be kind of neat. The idea that this city is kind of large and sprawling and continuously growing. Like it's seeing this surge of growth because of what's happened, and that's kind of spurring it on. But I kind of like the idea, and this kind of goes a little bit with the spirits you were talking about, that there are rumors, and you can play with this as wide as you would like. And you know how I do things. I always give out like the wide possibility and allow
Sure,
you to
sure.
fill in the details. But there are rumors that some parts of the city are changing, and no one knows why. Like it might seem like, oh, didn't the street go all the way down and now it kind of turns halfway? Or, I don't remember that building being there, but it doesn't look like it hasn't been there. And just
It
that kind of
wasn't there
idea that,
yesterday.
yeah, and kind of, and for whatever reason, and I think that'd be fun, kind of a background mystery to explore as a possibility. It gives you full freedom to kind of introduce whatever you want in the middle of anywhere, but it combines kind of the idea of the multiplanar travel, the spiritual power, the power of congregation, essentially, of people that are there. And I think it'd be an interesting kind of background feature at the very least of the idea that nobody really knows the city anymore. Because both on the surface, it's just that big and that complicated, that growing, but also there may be more to that.
Well, so on that note, that just reflects on something that I have kind of I discovered when I moved to the Boston area, which was a much bigger, more urban area than I had ever lived in prior to that, which was the realization that despite the density of the city, you don't as much have a sense of the entire region as much as what you know is like an archipelago of islands where you know this location and maybe a couple of square blocks around that, and you know this other location and a couple of square blocks around that, but you have no idea what's in between those two because you would never go from one to the other. You always would go from home to here and then back, and then from home to there and then back, but you would never go from this one to this one, so you don't know what's in between those. And I would imagine that a big city like this might be like that, that, people have their own sort of hangouts in the places that they go regularly and might know those places extremely well and still have zero idea what's in any of the other parts of the city.
Also, I'm totally on board for a Midgard ripoff. I want the multiple levels. I think that's such a cool visual and presents a whole bunch of literal strategization of the city as well.
Yeah.
Also, I kind of want to see those visions. You
Sure.
get that rotating restaurant in the middle of the sky.
Well, like I've already mentioned Eberron a couple of times. There's definitely going to be things that I'm borrowing from that setting, and I, maybe just as a sort of philosophy of what we're doing here, I'm going to be just upfront that like, yeah, there's going to be things that I'm just going to borrow, right? Like this is more or less it's a homebrew setting because we're not in Eberron. But that's one of the great things about all of these other published settings is you don't have to run it the way that book says, but you can look at a whole city in that book and say, the way they have that city work is cool. I want our city to work like that and things like that. So I think there's some of those things from Sharn City of Towers are probably going to make their way into Pashan. I think there can be, this is a lesson that I have learned as a DM over the last several years, which is that there can be this tendency to feel like, well, I have to make everything up from scratch, or else it's not really mine. And I think that doing that is a fair way to go, but it's certainly a lot more work.
I know this pain.
Yes. So,
That way madness lies.
yeah, exactly. So, who else has thoughts about the city, or any of the questions that we had sort of asked about any of our characters? Any additional thoughts on any of those things?
I do have one about kind of where the Cunning Oath Inn would be situated. And I'm picturing it sort of, it's not in a super fancy part of town. I'm thinking probably some in between districts that sort of house students and lower working class because the rent is cheaper. But hence the quite a few disturbances that go on there. So yeah, I'm thinking like right kind of down right in the center, catering to those two districts would be sort of where this particular inn would sit.
Very nice. So what is this place like? Because, you know, in our previous setting, I think there was sort of the classic fantasy tavern, right? But, you know, I think given that we're sort of doing post-industrial revolution stuff here, this could be like a dance club, it could be like a dive bar, it could be like an old retro fantasy tavern. It could be anything. You have any thoughts on what it's kind of what's the atmosphere like inside?
Somewhere between, it's not a dance club. Thinking somewhere between dive bar and fantasy tavern. It's not huge, but it's not tiny either. So it's kind of a middling type. But there's no stage, but the owner clearly had higher hopes for it than what it has become.
So one of the things that comes along with the idea that lower level magic is much more common are things like minor illusion and other sorts of low level illusion magics. It could be much more affordable even for a relatively you know, lower price bar. Just things that, you know, could replicate what we might think of as like stage lights or a disco ball or things like that.
Well, part of the reason that Carolina got hired is because she can do some of those things without, you know, having to ask anybody else for help. Kind of the total package.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So you came up with the Cunning Oaf name. Well, what does it mean? You don't
kind of-
have to answer that right now. I'm just curious
Yeah,
if
they
you
were
had
just
an
kind of
answer.
like I was looking through like name generators of things, and I just pulled two words. It's like, oh, that's kind of like because they're very opposing in nature. Because when you think of an oak, you don't necessarily think it's somebody that's particularly cunning. So, I was thinking something to express that kind of dual nature of it. That maybe it's not all that it seems. But yeah, just based on who the intended clientele is, who he's catering to, then yeah,
Okay.
it's not high class or anything. So
Sure. All right. So, what?
We're going to be here for a little while longer, right? So I want to do something neat. I want to ask, because we do have a few people in the chat room, and I want them to start shouting out some suggestions.
That's a good idea. Yeah. So if you're watching in the chat here, feel free to, if you have thoughts about things that you think would be cool to see in a city like this, or ideas, or even just questions that we could answer, that would all of that is welcome. So we'll give them a little bit of time. They can come up with those as they like. But that was a good idea, a good suggestion, Mark. So while we're waiting on any of those to come in, let's jump back to Chooch. Were you thinking that some of the people that Sequential had? Well, so the workshop that Sequential came from, was that outside of town, and you have come now to the big city, or was that somewhere
Definitely.
in the city? Okay, so
Definitely outside of town. I'm imagining it would have been within the Barrier Mountains. So he's traveled a bit,
okay, yeah,
and in fact, traveled kind of like discovered. Well, when you want to find things, you got to go to the capital.
sure.
So
How would he have traveled? Because certainly, I think in our current time period, there's probably a train, lightning rail train that just goes right in between, parts of the Barrier Mountains and Pashan.
Yeah.
Is that would he have bought a ticket and sat in a seat? Would he have mailed himself?
Yeah, I think probably. I think initially he would have started. They would have started fairly local, not knowing. It's so he would have established a kind of a search pattern, and then quickly realized there's no apparent clues, so started spreading out, and then probably hopped a train to the big city.
Nice. All right.
So
and-
I got to ask. This is something that that the Chooch kind of floated offline or different forum. But do you consider a sequential to possibly be a derivative design of a Denholmes?
As a matter of fact,
Of a
the
what?
name of the creator was Gregholm.
For Paul, in when my character was initially introduced, it was something that we had a basically an insane steam golem running around, and I decided to name it after the creator. My character was kind of insane at the time, and the creator was a gnome called Denholmes. So I didn't explain it to anybody else. I just kept calling it Denholmes, and they were like, "What the hell is he talking about?" It was fun. So,
And
for those
so-
of you
Yeah, we definitely thought that would be a fun connection. Is that
Yeah.
it was created by Denholm's brother, Gregholm.
Yes, well, that's where we left it off. Is that you all managed to shut down the golem and recover the blueprints and designs and everything, and you handed all of those over to Denholm's brother. So the idea that there is 100 years of iteration down the line, but there might be there is a connection there. So one of the other questions I was going to ask you, and then we have a couple coming in the chat, but we touched on the idea that some of the people that you encountered that maybe tried to take advantage of you might still be in the city. You have any more thoughts on who they might be? Bearing in mind, if you would rather I just come up with something and you have it be a mystery to be discovered later, totally okay too. This is only if you feel like you want to explore that.
Yeah, I didn't really have any ideas. I had those three names
All right.
that I mentioned, but yeah,
Those are
I
good names.
I think it would definitely be cool that at least one of them would be still in the city for sure.
Sure. So if you would like me to just take those names and run with them and have them show up at some point, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I think so. And something else that I thought of as kind of an open-ended that sequential would have in the time waiting, once you turned the chronometer back on and waited, would have essentially copied Gregholm's journals. Like, didn't want to take them because he might come back, but they're in a cipher. So he doesn't know necessarily what they say, and it's going to take time. So at random points, maybe after a long rest, he actually deciphers a segment that gives a clue about something. And so, yeah, and I was thinking, since he's this brilliant inventor, the cipher essentially, he adjusted it every month. So though I unlock a portion, it's not going to unlock the whole thing.
Sure.
But I have no idea what's in it.
That sounds fun. So we have some questions from the chat. Prince Justin asks, how is the city fed? By magic? Farms? Both? I mean, my initial gut reaction would probably be both. That I would imagine there's not only regional farms, but there's probably also like farms and gardens like within the city, like that are able to be more productive than you might normally think of as a city farm, just because you could have magic like plant growth and that sort of thing. But also, like one of the things that is another element from that could be, now that some lower level spells are more commonplace, the idea that they get iterated on and that people have their own sort of versions of them, I think, you might have, for example, people that can do conjure food and water, but then also have their own sort of little spin on it where they can make food that isn't just sort of bland crackers or something like that. And so there might be some of that too, is just using magic to create it. But anyone else have thoughts on that?
I love caravans in the fantasy world because they present opportunities to exotic things to come in or people from far away, and I kind of like the idea of there being regular caravans to the city, also some of them coming through portals from other planes and presenting entirely different things once in a while, and that can get mixed into the weirdness of the city.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely would have been what Mark just said. Definitely would have been one of the things that drew my character to the city.
Yeah. So, and I definitely think that would make a lot of sense based on, the world building that we've already talked about, in the sense that the idea that people travel, both, to different locations within a given plane and also between planes is much more common than it used to be. And so the idea that you might get a trade caravan that has actually come from the battlefields of Isgard through Emirate Arboris and then come through the mountains and then it's making its way through Pashan and kind of just doing a long tour of the prime material plane, like things like that happening so every so often, absolutely could be a thing.
No, I'm picturing like tourism like groups like with the little flags walking down.
Yeah, no, I 100% think that happens. Stuff like that.
And totally misrepresenting what a thing is. So like explaining something to tourists, but it's like a completely wrong description or explanation of whatever this thing is. Like,
I really like that. That's a fun hook for my character because she doesn't know shit.
Yeah, new to town.
She's going to take those tours and she's going to believe what they tell her.
Yeah.
Heck, I could see us giving a tour at some point.
oh yeah, I could definitely, I could get in on that.
Very nice. So that's fun. Yeah. So the idea that different foods coming from all over the multiverse come through with some regularity. I said, when you said caravan, what actually my brain went to is food trucks.
Yes.
Have you not had dinner yet, Christiana?
No, I'm fine. I'm not that hungry, but I just mean the idea, we're talking about it in the context of where people get food, and, the idea that there's these, different people, pass through with their own sorts of things, and that it might be common to just say, hey, I want to try some elemental plane of air food. What do they eat? That seems interesting.
Yeah.
To kind of branch off of that, I'm thinking about the underground, right? Big city, interdimensional. There's going to be a dark underbelly.
Oh, sure.
And there's probably going to have to be some kind of customs control, because you could have unique diseases coming from another plane of existence or something, right? So maybe there's, like exotic underground restaurant rings that have things that are outlawed in other planes or something.
Yeah.
Or they're not outlawed in other planes, but they're just shunned in ours, maybe.
Right.
Like delicacy there, and we're like,
turn to the left, wait for the maids to wave the wand, lift your arms. Yes, all of them. Another thing that kind of occurs to me that I would love to see, and I don't properly keep good calendars on the games that I run, and it annoys me. But one of the things I would love to see is celebrations at different points that go on, and they can be regional, they can be citywide, they can be worldwide. Maybe there's a World Rashama Day or something celebrating the day the signal was out, or it could be like, this is Food Week and all the food vendors are competing or whatever.
Yeah, it's
I think
kind of
those
like
are always
you're
kind of
hurrying
fun.
I would
across the
imagine-
city and discover, oh no, we can't get through this way because today is the day that the Wood Elves do their parade through to honor their historic journey from whatever to whatever, like
Yeah, or just fun celebrations that give us a different opportunity in game to role play and to interact in things that aren't necessarily pressure based. I mean, maybe we're doing the strongman competition, and for some
Yeah.
reason Nedry's winning, or whatever. I love those kind of opportunities to kind of show a periodicity and show time changing and stuff like that in a game too. So
it looks like we've got
And it's a natural
we've got
fit
an
under
image
Solomonian.
for Zinhorn. So here's a question:
Nice.
does he have wings? Because I think typically the Dragonborn don't, at least to start. Like, I think that can be something that some classes might get eventually, but what do you think about that?
I looked at the pictures on just a generic web search for D&D Dragonborn, and it looked like about 10% of them had wings.
I think
And
it's
so-
something that it's like sometimes there are definitely later, like, higher level features. Sometimes where, like, I know that, like, draconic origin sorcerers can get that, for example, but it wouldn't be typical of a level 1. But I'm not saying no necessarily. I'm kind of, let's talk about it.
I'm thinking maybe he doesn't fly yet, but he's got wings.
Okay.
And especially with the kids, he trades on as soon as I can fly, I'll take you for a ride. Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah, sure.
And can get a lot of cooperation that way because it doesn't cost him anything because he has no idea when he may be strong enough to fly or if he'll ever fly. And he has no idea how to go about it if he did. He's not even sure he remembers ever seeing his parents fly.
Well, so
we're
here's
gonna have so much fun with flying lessons.
yeah. So here's a question. This is something that I was thinking might be introduced a little bit gradually, but we can certainly talk about it now, which is just the idea that what has become a little bit more common in recent times too, in addition to discovering various little pocket dimensions, is because all of the different planes have much more interaction with each other now, and just the nature of magic, there's a lot more sort of cross-pollination, so to speak. I think that the idea of different people being born with, like, I don't want to, anomalies sounds like a bad, like, negative connotation. That's not what I mean. More just unusual traits, you know, that are somewhat unexpected. But, your character was young, like, back at that time. So I'm just tossing that out there as something. Would we want to, like, if you want to just have had the wings, totally fine. But maybe as another alternative, it could even be something like you didn't have him before that party and he came out with them, or something like that. What do you think? I mean, if you would rather just have been born with them, that's fine too.
Yeah, I think he was born with them, and his parents. My take on it is that there's a small percentage of Dragonborn that have wings and some that don't.
Sure.
And it's a recessive genetic trait, and his parents both had wings. He had wings, and it wasn't a thing. It just was, some people did, some people didn't, but they're all people.
Yeah.
Like freckles.
And, he wound up in this place where there aren't many Dragonborn, so he has no idea, what to do. But, this place has been very good for him. He misses his parents. He doesn't know if he'll ever see them again. He probably thinks he won't because, he'll probably die of old age before they ever find their way out of the pocket party.
Well, would you have gone looking for it to try to get back there?
He doesn't remember where he was when he came out.
Right.
He was very confused and, probably a little drunk,
Yeah.
as a 10-year-old, and just wandering off. And, he's just really happy that he found people that actually, care about other people.
Nice. All right, so we've got more stuff coming up in the chat, and I'm definitely not going to ignore those. But one thing I want to revisit that I kind of tossed out a little bit earlier is the idea of who's in charge of Pashan. Like, do they have a ruling council? Is it one guy? Does he have his own sort of, like, is there any kind of an organized police, or is it more just like the people who can afford it buy private security and that's about it, or what?
I like the idea of having different sections of the city treated like smaller, almost independent municipalities.
Sure.
So, like in his section of the city, they have their own mayor, but there's, the mayor is part of the ruling council, but there's also like a second body, and their concern is the whole city.
Okay. Yeah. So it could be
What
like, oh, go ahead.
What if it would be something like, because I mean you're a cleric, so there's probably a temple there. What if each section of town, like whatever was the most prominent thing there, that was kind of where the rules came from?
Yeah, I mean that seems to fit with what I was saying. Each section of the city can have their own individual rules, but you still have to have, some governing body for the city itself to make sure, like there's enough water for people to drink. There's enough.
I was kind of thinking about the idea that there still is an emperor, but
Yeah.
the emperor is just more or less a figurehead at this point, and it's slowly transitioning away from that, so that there's a rising bureaucracy that's now really in power. And then I do love the idea of the districts kind of having a bit of autonomy, or maybe even fighting for autonomy.
Yeah.
Or that rising, it's a de facto autonomy at the moment, but trying to get it formalized and recognized.
Something that kind of occurred to me is
But of
maybe,
course, then there's the underground that they really run things.
yeah.
Well, they would be cross districts too.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to say is that the idea that like there's an emperor, and at least in principle, whatever they say still goes, but 99.9% of the time it's the local mayor and their organization that actually runs things in the district where you are. And it's more or less a thing of like they're kind of always a little bit on eggshells, hoping that the emperor doesn't decide to be interested in their district today, and that there's they mostly are able to run things on their own, but in principle still have to do what the emperor says if he decides to give some sort of a directive, but that he does that more and more infrequently. Because he's...
And they might also have latitude to interpret.
It'd be kind of like either in Canada it would be provinces in the federal government, or in the States it'd be the states in the federal government, where there's a sort of jurisdiction. There would be like the imperial troops, which are responsible for city defense and maybe import-export, stuff like that, or when it crosses over a district. But within a district, they're expected to hand it over to the local magistrate or the local business.
Yeah. That makes sense to me. And so we might have each district kind of be very different in terms of the practical elements of, what it's like here and there. But like they all in principle report to the emperor, but most of the day-to-day stuff is decided at the district level.
Right. And I would think, if you're going to have the emperor, he's going to have some ministers that handle a couple of things, and then there'll be like a council of mayors, where they can, all fight and horse trade and
Yeah, yeah.
And as Triffid Mats points out in the chat room, jurisdictional frictions can be lots of fun. I could see, potentially districts going to war with each other, either explicitly or implicitly.
Right. Well,
yeah, but it doesn't have to be a war of weapons. You could have a war of restaurants.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Or just kind of like, one district has, kind of, you've got the merchants in that one particular district decided to get together and all buy up all of the supplies of some particular kind of magic ore, and now they're declaring a monopoly on it, and the other districts can't get it without going through them, and it's like, hey, you can't do that. And it's like, oh yeah, well, why not? And it's, well,
we already did.
Yeah, I'll take it to the emperor. And it's like, yeah, good luck with that. Those sorts of things. And then, of course, as mentioned previously, too, the idea that there's sort of an underworld to that, too, in the sense of like maybe organized crime or just black markets of things, I think all of that makes sense that would exist in a setting.
I think it'd be great to have like a half a dozen of the most well-known districts so that we have those for reference. And then there are as many districts as needed. So you can always add another one, or, they change or whatever, which gives, you don't have to define all that. But I think having a half a dozen with sort of distinct character up front, even if it's one or two lines, gives us something to chew on.
Yep. That's kind of what I was thinking too, is that, we would have sort of the big players, and then there's kind of smaller neighborhoods maybe even within those, but or the outskirt areas, or that sort of thing, but you have sort of the big ones. Yeah, okay, great. So let's go back to some of the questions from the chat. We have Smartamaster asking, what is your character's favorite view in the city? And so like this can be anything. Like, like I said, imagine that this city can contain anything you want it to contain. So what would be a cool place that your character would like in the city? And it could be somewhere that they have been already, or just will become their favorite once they go there.
I like the old city walls that are closer into the center of the city. They're a little tumble down, and parts of them are leaning and crooked a little bit. But you can get up high and you can see the city and the river flowing through, the two rivers and where they meet, and all the way out to the plains, and see, like where the wheat is grown and stuff like that. And just having that big horizon in front of you is kind of nice. And nobody really bothers you up there, because nobody really goes up there anymore.
Nice.
Except people who want to get away from other people.
So I have two. The first would be, I guess it would be like a sort of central square in the trade district, where there's all different kinds of people coming and going, of just all shapes and sizes and colors, like all different races, just always coming and going and doing business. So that would be her first, and because one of her favorite things to do is people watch. And the second would actually be a small playground, an enclosed yard, that is actually part of the orphanage. She enjoys watching the children play because it was not something she got to do growing up.
Nice.
I think oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go for it.
I haven't fully cooked
Neither
it, so
have I.
you go ahead. Oh.
I got nothing.
Well, I'll just jump in to give Viv a bit more time to think then. I'm just thinking that at least one sort of magic university area. It's a kind of, so what I kind of see of Nedrick, he's apprenticed in the hopes of learning enough that maybe he can apply to the college proper if he's good enough. And so there's a bit of wonder in going into that space and seeing people who are, I mean, these are, I'm thinking magical college students. They are showing off like mad all the time. So that would be kind of just a wonder to walk through and see all the bizarre things they're trying to do and showing off and one-upmanship and that sort of thing.
And blowing themselves up.
Possibly. Yeah, they probably have a pretty good fire station in that area.
Yeah, a big burn ward.
So one thought I had related to Magic University is the idea that there might be like an area that's like the old campus, like that back when the city was much smaller, that's where wizards studied, but that now there's now a much larger area where it's kind of just zoned for all sorts of other like magical studies and other, like much smaller organizations or independent wizards that set up their own shop or tower, or so that sort of thing. So there's kind of like a neighborhood that's somewhat separate from like the old university, which, like there's still like connections there, but there might be a little bit of a, the old university is kind of the like slightly snooty and pretentious, and the other district is a little bit more, wild card.
And there has
Awesome.
to be at least one cursed building there where something really bad happened, and so nobody will go there anymore.
Well,
Or rumored
it's
to be cursed.
no, that absolutely makes me think of a real time that I visited a company that I was interviewing for back, before I got my current job, and this was on an army base, and they were giving me the tour, and then they looked over at the building, and I was like, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's the anthrax building." He's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, they used to work on anthrax there, and it's actually really a pain to clean that up, following all the rules. So we actually instead just closed off the building and don't use it anymore."
Yeah. Believe
So,
it.
yeah, it's literally cheaper to just not use that whole building than it would be to clean it properly. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the Tennessee Valley Authority has one of those where they worked on radioactive materials, and like they have to wait 50 years before it's going to be safe for them to decontaminate the building or something.
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
So things like that, I can definitely imagine being in this sort of setting.
So I thought of something
Yeah.
that really, I feel like an idiot because the answer was right in front of my face. She would go somewhere, she would tend towards places that smell different, amazing. Like she would be drawn to botanical areas to smell flowers that she'd never smelled before. Like that's like a really keen sense for her. So she would literally just walk out and follow her nose.
Sure.
And that would lead her to like food areas as well because of all the spices. And
I
the
was just going to
smells that would
say, like,
come
what
from
if there's
that.
like a spice market?
Yeah. And so she would be there and people would look at this elephant person and be like, oh, she's hungry. She's going to eat. And she never eats. She just smells everything. And she just tries to learn the name of it and catalog what it is away. Similar to sequential, but, different.
Very nice.
Yeah. But she also is a huge lover of music. And I don't know if Carolina,
Yes.
that if her bar would be someplace that a Dummel tourist
Well,
would
I definitely see it on street level, and I don't know. Should I
think
tell
about
him?
that. Think about that. You don't have to reveal anything you don't want to. I'm just saying it's a possibility.
Well, so
Don't no, it's not gonna be my fault. You say anything you don't want to say, Hooker. No. It's not me.
I'm really bad at keeping secrets, though, especially stuff I'm excited about. So I don't know.
Let's leave a few
Okay.
things to come.
So
Yeah.
she's a big music lover. So she would seek out places that she would just be able to find as, a semi-clueless. She does have some information, but she certainly doesn't know the
All right. So, just since we're talking about your character, have you got more thoughts on the name? Do you want to Like, if you would rather just keep thinking about it on your own, that's okay.
Yeah.
You don't
I think
have
I'm
to
going to need
pick
to think about the
something
name a
tonight.
little longer, but I do have a question about the background.
Sure.
Oh, and she would obviously, because of her observational thing, I kind of picture her. So she's got a solid wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
but her intelligence is, she's not that worried about it.
Yeah.
So I see her as being like she's studied and learned and all of that stuff on her world, but she's not the smart one in the room. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Like, from a history perspective, she knows her history,
Exactly.
but
She
not
doesn't know.
this history.
Yeah.
So
I
like,
would see her going to like libraries
Mm-hmm.
and she would go to like the history of, the city.
Mm-hmm.
And she would get that book and she'd be so excited and she'd try to read it and she just can't make sense of it. So she
Mm-hmm.
actually finds herself in the young adult and the kids section. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's how she's learning a lot of what she's trying to pick up, which really works for her because she finds that not only are a lot of words that she hasn't learned yet not in those, but they make the concepts very simple to understand. And I haven't decided yet if she knows the difference between fiction or nonfiction. So that might be a little confusing at points. But so like that's all part of it. And then like when I look at the backgrounds, I've got a couple favorites that I'm looking at. And there's like archaeologist, far traveler, anthropologist, outlander. Those all kind of make sense. There's one called, and I'm going to mispronounce it, Selesnya Initiate, which seems to be just built for her. Because
Okay. I mean, so I think I don't know the word because I think it's one of like the setting specific ones, but that's fine.
right. But I wanted to ask, like, the main benefit to that background would be like, as an initiate, as a member of this blessed community, she would have like refuge in Selesnya enclaves and that sort of thing.
Hang on.
Would there
I'm
be
pulling it
any
up.
in this world?
Well, I
Like,
mean,
not from her pocket dimension, obviously, maybe not.
Well,
or-
so
like, have
I
you
mean,
thought
but
about that?
Here's the question. Let's decide if there is or not.
Oh.
Right?
Oh,
Like, do you
okay.
want there to be? Right? Like, because we could have it be that the place that Loxodons come from, it could be that like it's new to you, but other Loxodon have been coming to the prime material plane for a
Right.
while, and there are places where some of them have settled, and there's not that many, but here and there's a place where, like, oh, they've got like a little commune over on 6th Street, and you can go and stay with them or
Yeah.
that sort of thing. Like, it could be something like that if that's something that you would want.
I do like the idea because I don't see her going back to her plane or her dimension anytime soon. I do like the idea that maybe she's not the very first, because why would they send a dumb ingenue,
Well-
first? So she wouldn't be the first from hers. So maybe there are a few, but more
The-
than what sequential would find of his of his kind, obviously.
Well, so let me just pitch one alternative to that is that it could be that you find that there is some organization or something like that exists in our setting that is enough like where you came from that you find common cause with them and could stay there, but it doesn't have to be other Loxodon.
Okay.
So do one or the other of those sound preferable?
I honestly, I do kind of like the idea of her meeting Loxodons from elsewhere.
Yeah, okay. So it could be that like you are still relatively exotic for most people, but there are other Loxodon here and there, and they would tend to have like little community clusters where they settle,
Okay.
and that wherever you might find those, you would certainly be welcomed.
Right on.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. Let me do some more reading. I like the idea of that, but it would still be, I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, think about
I had
that.
a similar thing with the background that there was another source book that seemed to really match. And so I went ahead and picked it, and I'm just kind of
Yeah, that's fine.
ignoring the fancy words around it because,
Yeah, no, that's totally okay.
it makes sense.
Same here.
Yeah.
Saw shiny things.
Sure. Well, that's part of the fun of having all of the different source books to draw from. So, did we get everybody with their favorite view of the city? Did we get one for you?
I didn't
Seymour?
actually do one.
Or yeah,
My first thought was very similar to Starla's. Secondary is actually watching the children.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that would be interesting to Sequential because he was never a child. They were never really a child. They were fully formed, right? And so perhaps had childish mental development along the way at some point, but was fully formed and seeing these things grow into what they're going to become would be very fascinating.
Yeah, I would think that would be fascinating. Just this, like, they start very small and they just get bigger. Like, they
Wait,
just
how
get
do they know when
bigger?
to
Like, how
stop?
do they do that? Like, how do they know when to stop? That's like, that's an existential philosophy question, isn't it? Okay, so that's fun. And then, yeah, Zinhorn was the old city walls. That's right, I remember.
Yep.
I am absolutely going to be, I'm not taking notes now because I'm going to be re-listening to all of this. So, okay, so we've got a few more things from the chat. There is some discussion. I'm going to combine a couple. We've got from Trifid Emet asks about trade guilds or craft guilds, and are they strict in controlling upstarts? And that kind of can dovetail with Prince Justin's asking, cities have rivalries within and without. Neighborhoods within, what about without? What are the sports like in this world? So some of these other sorts of organizational questions. What do you guys think about that?
I like to think of more trade guild based sports, or like the city's best wait staff, where they take a long field and set up a kitchen and a bunch of tables, and somebody has to run all the way to the end, get the orders, run back, and they can't screw up an order or drop anything or they lose points. Like,
I like the idea of seeing on the side of the door as you go in, there's certification about when the years they won the competitions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like a good-natured thing, though, right?
Yeah.
Is how you
yeah.
mean that one? Yeah.
I'm sure they
Yeah.
get dirty once in a while.
Oh,
There's lots
sure.
of accusations of
Sure.
cheating and
Yeah. Some of those barbecue cook-offs get kind of rough,
But
Yeah.
like,
Well, and I would imagine too that if there is that added level of, like, if you have a restaurant, you don't want to. It's not just about getting customers for your restaurant. It's also this extra level of it. I would imagine that there can be this element of, like, competitiveness in terms of, like, if you want a job at a good place, like, you have to be able to show that you're going to be able to do well, and there would be some, it's like, oh, okay, well, but there's also a dwarven food place over in the other district, and they think that they have the best bread, and but we're going to show them this year. That could be fun.
but like they have those world's greatest lumberjack contests.
Yeah.
And stuff that's more trade based, but you can make a sport out of it.
yeah.
World's toughest bartenders, like throwing kegs over buildings, or
Great Bashan Bake Off.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Nice. I also thought that on that same basis, that given the idea of a city that consists of all of these, like, improbably sized towers with weird bridges and curves and all of that
Yeah.
sort of thing, that something like competitive parkour could be
Necessary.
could be fun.
Yes.
Like the idea of, like, you have to get from this part of the city to that part of the city on foot as a race, but you can go any way you want, that sort of thing.
That's awesome.
Like some races of people are going to be able to, like, walk on the outside of the buildings clinging onto the rocks that others aren't. So
Yeah,
And
there
the
would,
university has been complaining about the anti-mage rules for years.
well, I was going to say, like, there would probably have to be a lot of complex and disputed rules about what kinds of magic are allowed and what aren't.
But see, that opens up a whole new like underground magic for like how to secretly cheat at these
Oh,
things.
yeah.
Yeah.
Street level competitions like drag racing, except absolutely no rules. You can use magic. You can, you can have spider people, and the goal is to get from point A to point B, going through all of these stations, and whoever gets there first wins, and that's the only rule.
All right. Well, we've got
Cannonball Run rules.
roll stats
Yeah.
in the chat saying, okay, if competitive parkour is not a thing in this campaign, I'm going to be really disappointed. So I guess.
I don't know if any of these characters can necessarily do it all that
Well, we'll have to see.
Probably,
but,
probably the Luxodon is probably.
I
the
know
best
somebody that
example.
wants to try.
Yeah. Well, maybe you all need to just sponsor and help train some up and comer.
Oh, there you go.
Yep.
Absolutely.
All right. So
Oh,
we're
I just had a totally mischievous idea, but anyway.
Those are my favorite.
Sure. So here's a fun character-based question. Roll Stats had asked, I like to ask players, what is something your character would never do? What is that line in the sand that you will not cross? And then what is the one thing that would make you cross that line? Let the moral quandaries begin.
That's a good one.
My character would never harm a child. And I don't know what it would take him to cross that line.
To cross that line.
Yeah, I don't think he would.
Well, so what I'm going
But
to.
he hasn't gotten to that point yet.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, so I was just going to say, I think that it's probably easier to come up with the line and then leave the other half as a little bit of a but what could do it? Because in some ways that's a question for me, right?
Yeah.
What circumstance can I conceive where you would feel it necessary to go across that line? Although I'm not probably going to try to conceive circumstances where I would force you to harm a child. But yeah, anyone else have their own?
I have one, but it's kind of lighthearted.
Sure.
She would never use the shell game for anything but entertainment purposes, never to actually place bets.
Ah,
Tingle, tingle. Tingle.
very nice.
That's exciting.
I think it's going to be interesting to play this out because I think it's going to be interesting to play this out because Nedry will confuse people.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna keep my answer to myself.
And that's totally fine. Like I said, like at the beginning here, tonight is for stuff to help you get a fuller picture in your own mind, but not requiring you to reveal anything you aren't ready to reveal or just don't want to reveal yet. That's all fine.
For my character, it would be she would never betray her people, like ever. Like that is a huge affront amongst her race. You are loyal or you are nothing. And the thing that would make her be disloyal is if she was convinced that it would save them. Like it would take their loss to get her to betray him. It's that severe. So I don't know if that is the spirit of what.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Sequential, do you have one?
Can't really think of anything just
It's
yet.
harder for you, I think,
Would you ever?
because it's logic.
Would you ever use a poor laboratory technique?
Oh, there you go. Like violate safety standards.
Always wear goggles.
Doesn't take notes one day. Feels bad.
Yeah, yeah.
Would you ever
you go.
falsify data?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
Does that mean he won't lie?
that's immediately where I led to is that like bearing false witness. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun stuff to think about for sure. So I think Prince Justin has another sort of big open-ended one of memorials, statues, objects d'art in the city. What are they like? What do they celebrate? Are they treasured, ignored, forgotten?
I have a thought that there were a bunch of statues of whatever government was there before the empire that were sort of lost and forgotten and just ignored, and then somebody came up with the idea of like dragging them all to the art school, and every year the art students get to paint them in various ways just to brighten up that part of the city or show a particular mood. And
You know
so
what?
there's a garden of statues, and every year they get new paint jobs.
You know what I was just going to say that makes me think of is like different cities will have like they'll have like 100 of the same wolf statue or something, but they have like every contests where like 100 different people each decorate one in their
Yeah.
own particular way. They
Yeah,
put 'em
down
all
in
over.
like the Norfolk
Love
area,
that.
it was mermaids all over the place.
But I like the idea though that it's actually this same set of statues, but people just sort of do them up differently every time.
And it's a way to keep history alive.
Yeah.
So that'd be a
There's
neat
also-
way, you know.
There's this tradition at the Naval Academy that I think it's the graduating class. I'm trying to remember if it's like on graduation day or shortly before, but essentially they oil up this big statue and the class has to get to the top of it and either take off the hat or put a hat up there, but it's like all oily and slippery and like they're hosing him down and everything. It's a really silly tradition, but it's something they do every year.
Nice.
Probably not this year.
I kind of like the idea that the city is in continual change, and there's a bit of concern of gentrification or knocking down of old buildings or old statues to make room for new buildings and stuff, and that's a bit of a conflict and a bit of an issue.
I mean, that's a very good example of some of the types of conflict that there might still be. Is just that a lot of things are changing very quickly, and in a setting where there are people who live hundreds of years, you might have some very different opinions about how important it is to preserve that one old building, or whether it's what it means to say no, we need to relocate these statues because we're putting a lightning rail track through here. Some of those sorts of things, or even for that matter, just like, ever since we put in the new park, rents have gone up in that area, and so now a bunch of people are feeling like they have to move.
So tying back into that, every borough kind of has its own like spirit. What if each spirit sort of had its own statue, but those statues were constantly moving?
Well, I mean, I was literally imagining that like there's literal like the spirit is not abstract, right? Like there's literally like a physical manifestation of the spirit, and it could be very different from one district to the next, but could very well be represented as a big moving living statue essentially.
Or
Well,
like,
and not even necessarily living. It's just it's here one day, and the next day it's in a different place entirely.
Well, right, and
and nobody sees it move.
Yeah, I mean that could be like how one of them is, and there might be another that's
a different blank
that's different.
like
Yeah.
a gingerbread house. You could have like an 8-foot tall gingerbread house that moves around the district. I'll be right back.
Sure.
Are you going for gingerbread? Because now I want some.
Well, I think we're getting close to probably finishing for tonight, but we can maybe cover a couple more things because just some of the wrap up stuff I would want Paul to be back for. But yeah, I like these are exactly the sorts of things that I think are fun to think about here.
I like the idea that the city is really old and some of its history has been forgotten. That that there are statues that no one remembers what the statue was actually for, or
Yeah.
that there are
Yeah.
old buildings that have been rebuilt so many times that you can kind of see 4 or 5 different generations all in that one building.
Oh, yeah,
and then
definitely.
there's a surge in History Society that's trying to recover all these things.
Yeah, that plays into the erroneous tours, property tours really well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that too, that if we want to use the fun magic giant city trope of having these enormously tall towers, it kind of just raises the question of like you have your particular structure, but it's like been built on top of a whole bunch of other things. It's like there's some definitely real world examples of layers and layers of older and
Seattle and
older
San
city.
Francisco
Yeah.
both have those like underground.
Oh, Paris. Paris is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I definitely think there's going to be elements of that. But yeah. So does anyone have anything that you kind of wanted to talk more about with your character before we kind of move on and wrap things up?
I feel like I have one thing that I have to get out of my system,
Sure.
and that is calling her a barbarian.
I just knew you were going there.
I just had to get it out of my
In
system.
my head, since you mentioned the characters, like, oh God, no, not barbarian.
Well, so here's
Just,
the
I
important...
just had to just do it that one time.
Okay. Well, so if I was just going to say, if you want that to be a thing, it can be a thing. Like I think it
tempting.
would actually be a little bit funny that like that there might even just be sort of a cultural difference of like
That's how they
you
pronounce
say
it.
I'm a barbarian and people say
That
are
barbarian?
you saying barbarian? That's what I said, barbarian.
What
Barbarian.
am I saying?
What are you saying? Yeah. I kind of like that.
Secret wish fulfilled.
Sure. So what I was going to kind of start to do as we kind of start to wrap up for this session 0 is to first just say the sort of collaborative world building we're doing where we're sort of picking out and saying like, well, I would like it if this is in the city. I would like it if that's in the city. That's not just a session 0 thing. I would like to encourage that to be an ongoing process. Like obviously as we'll play, we'll start establishing in a slightly more concrete way certain parts of the city. But I would like it to, the city is big enough and got so much stuff in it as we're establishing that I think that there's always room for you to say, I would like it if there's a place where like there's this one particular kind of restaurant and that's where I go when I'm having a bad day, right? Like stuff like that. That's an ongoing. I want that to be, you can always toss stuff like that out. Especially if we're like not in the middle of a like critical, like tense situation and it's more just like a little bit of a downtime episode or whatever. Like, that's always open. And that's going to be true of the wider world, not just the city too, because we're not always going to just be in the city.
Yay. It's like Ket's mansion, but the whole city.
Yeah. So the last thing, the last sort of note that I have, Paul, did you have anything else that you wanted to kind of cover with your character, or you're muted? We can't hear you, Paul. I think you're muted.
Yeah, it makes things much more interesting if you can hear me.
Yeah.
I did a bunch of writing when you asked me those questions at the beginning of the episode. So I've got all that in my character sheet.
Okay, great.
One piece that I would like to share with you, because it's based on reality, is Nair is a younger prior at the orphanage. He's the child of wealthy parents who have 14 children. For a time, his father was mayor of this section of the city. He is Zinhorn's best friend. His mother is always trying to feed Zinhorn. he has nightmares about Nyara's mother forced feeding him meatballs.
Excellent.
Nice.
Nice.
And I actually grew up with a girl whose father was mayor of the town, and she was one of 14 children. They had
Wow.
2 houses, one in the north part of town, one in the south part of town. So like half the kids went to different junior highs. And my friends that I played D&D with, my friend Lou's mom was always trying to feed us. And our friend Joe had nightmares about her force feeding him meatballs.
Wow. I love it.
Excellent. All right. So, if that kind of covers the things that we wanted to sort of get through tonight, the last thing I was going to leave us with before we wrap our session 0 here is just what I have on my agenda here is campaign wishes. And so what that just kind of means is, what is something that you would like to have happen in the campaign, or just can be like an abstract idea that you want to explore a little bit, a theme, could be some kind of a location you would want to go to. It can be anything that comes to mind when I ask the question, what is something that you would like to have happen in this campaign?
Phew.
That's a big question.
Adventure on so many levels.
I want to see all the things and go all of the places.
I want, and you don't have to tell us, but I'm kind of probably going to be on the lookout for it, for things that, and this is me, not the character, for things that you wrote or dreamt up last campaign and never got to use after trying probably multiple times to get us in a certain direction and we just wouldn't. So
There's
I'm
a
excited
handful.
to see. Honestly, it's just so fun to see what you write and then the way we react to it and how that builds into something else is I can't think of any wishes beyond just discovering more. See all the things, like Starla said.
I would love to dig into mysteries in one way or the other, where there's something that's going on and we have to investigate, we have clues, we have to figure out and talk to people and then, find out what's going on, fight some bad guy or whatever. And then, and different kinds of mysteries too. Like it might be like, there's something strange going on in this neighborhood and who you going to call? Us, Buster. And one of the things I really want, and this is one of those weird meta things, which is sort of kind of implied, but also sometimes falls apart, is I want this to be a group of people who want to be together. And for whatever reasons you can come up with for your character to want to be there, even though I like the idea of characters irritating each other or getting on each other's nerves or coming into conflict in certain ways, but always with that idea of how can I turn this into a way that they can grow together. Like I said, with Nedry, he's going to be pestering people with questions all the time. But he wants to learn. He wants to know more. And that's one of the things that he's there for. And, because I feel like sometimes if we keep that in mind, if we set that in our minds ahead of time, then it changes the way you approach certain conflicts. You see it as a way to further story or make things more complicated in story, rather than these two characters are irreconcilable.
Yeah, and arguing about a point rather than discovering about each other, right? Is that what you mean?
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's also,
And I think it's interesting that just hearing what everybody's said about their characters is that all of us seem to have this kind of curiosity, this wanting to learn thing in common. So, I mean, already we've got a pretty good foundation for
Agreed,
that
yeah.
exact thing.
Yeah.
I think, is it just me that's tired of having to know everything that's going on in the universe concurrently? It's like, oh, she doesn't know nothing, guys. Yeah. No, I agree. I think that's a great commonality that we have.
I would like morally unambiguous bad guys that we can beat up throw in jail, kill, whatever is required. Solve mysteries is fantastic. Find clues, follow people, ask the right questions,
Help people.
help
Ask the
people.
wrong questions.
Because that's
Ask
always
all the questions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Any others? I mean, if not, so the other piece is just like with the world building stuff. Consider it an open question. So if you think of something else later,
Yeah.
let me know.
I know I'm curious about how we're going to feel, our characters are going to feel about Solomania. Like, because I'm not Amethyst, so I'm not coming into it with any knowledge of what that was or anything. So it's going to be really interesting to see how you present things for our brand new characters for that.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm excited. Cute.
There is a tension that I really enjoy just in the idea that I think for most people the idea that she's just an unambiguously good force in the universe is ordinary, but you as players might have some complicated feelings about it.
Should we have left her in charge of everything, guys?
Not Carolina. She loves everybody.
Wow.
All right, so
That's going to take a few episodes. Hold on.
So it sounds like you're all excited. Was there anything that you wanted to do tonight that we didn't get to? No?
Is there
All right.
anything that we can roll dice for?
Everyone roll initiative
When
right
we haven't rolled
now.
dice.
Everyone
Have
roll
my dice.
initiative.
Roll for initiative.
Roll initiative.
Yeah.
But I haven't picked out his dice yet.
Oh, 6.
On the spot.
Okay, I got one.
8.
So I don't know who wants to roll for it or what you would want to take for that, but I will spill a secret for one dice roll.
So what do you mean?
Well,
Someone-
that's what I'm saying. Like, what's the criteria here? I
You gotta
don't,
set the
like,
DC.
You want to
Yeah.
20 or like?
Are we talking investigation here?
Well, here's the other thing. It seems
Because I
like
really
what
want to tell you guys
I
one
can
of these
tell.
things.
Yeah.
Give us a DC, Christiana. We'll roll for it.
Okay, so I'm gonna say it's an insight check, right? That makes sense to me. That is a let's go ahead and say DC 17.
All right, I get plus
Okay.
4.
2.
I got a 12. I did not make it.
Oh, 13. Womp.
Juge, Mark, you guys gonna roll for it?
I got a 2.
Yeah.
Come on, Jude.
And
Come on,
16.
sequential.
16.
No.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, so here's the thing, like, not binding. You can still tell if all of that process made you feel, Starla, like you actually do want to tell after all. Feel free. Otherwise, keep it secret. However you want to do it. It's
Your
fine.
choice.
Well, the thing about the secret is that some of you know some of it. One of you knows all of it.
God, this is turning into some game of Clue.
I know. I feel like I need to roll for IQ at this point.
And the person that rolled the highest knows all of it. So
Oh.
Well, how about this?
Chooch in the office with the guitar.
I'm going to propose then that we bring our session 0 to a close, and the secret that is sort of a secret and not always a secret, and secret on alternate Wednesdays, well, can be revealed later.
they just have to tune in next week.
You'll have
Oh, I'll
to tune
get
in
it out of
next
them.
week when we begin our adventure on so many
So
levels.
many,
many
so many
So
levels.
many levels.
So many.
So thank you everyone for listening and or watching. We had a lot of great people in the chat participating. That was great. This was a fun session 0, and I can't wait for next week. And I kind of did the sign off before all of that part, so now it's a little anticlimactic, but I think that'll be okay.
We can do it again.
It'll be okay on so many
On
levels.
so many
So many
levels.
levels.
So many levels.